Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran who still thinks they need to get their album reviewed by the quote-unquote blogosphere, or else a scrappy upstart who literally does not understand the concept of an album review, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the first Friday of August 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Scotty who drove a conversion van that had drapes and an actual tube television in the back, and who was always trying to sell you MDMA that he had packaged in foot by the foot containers. And old Scotty would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a little community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. That's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube. Head on over to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, you search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. A subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig this show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and the capital to contribute to the show in that way. I very much appreciate it. If you're not in a place where you can contribute in that way, totally understandable. You could still help out the show in a couple ways that are free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store. Or second, you could just tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I hope that you enjoy this week's chat with Joe. Our guest this month is one of the founding members of a band that's been an American institution for the last 30-some years, the mighty BossTones. Joe Gittelman has been one of the creative forces in the band, alongside lead vocalist Dickie Barrett, during their decades-long run in both underground and mainstream music. After getting their start in the punk and hardcore scenes of Boston in the late 1980s, the band signed with Mercury Records, which brought them to national prominence. Their 1997 album, Let's Face It, featured the hit song The Impression That I Get, which topped Billboard's modern rock charts and earned them appearances everywhere from Sesame Street's Elmo-Palooza to Saturday Night Live. It was a genuine cultural phenomenon. They recorded for Island, Def Jam, Mercury, Side One Dummy, and Hellcat Records. Glide magazine calls them ska legends. Spin magazine called their last album a true masterpiece. The BossTones abruptly and unexpectedly broke up in January of this year. This interview is Joe Gittelman's first since their breakup. Joe Gittelman, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. So the Mighty Mighty BossTones are really known for this pretty original fusion of ska and punk. That's kind of like a genre of its own now. It wasn't when you guys started out. So I'm particularly interested in what music looked like in your household growing up. How did you become aware of such seemingly disparate genres of music?
Great question. I just last week was my dad's memorial, and at the memorial we played a slideshow, and the music was From the Harder They Come, that album. Are you familiar with The Harder They Come?
Jimmy Cliff?
Yeah. My dad loved Jimmy Cliff, and so when I was young, we were listening to that music in my dad's house. My folks divorced early. Both houses had some music. Over in my mom's house, there would be all kinds of music, and adults would be getting kind of wild, and it was an interesting time to grow up in the 70s in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I went to a sort of hippy dippy open classroom private school where kids sat on the floor, and on Fridays we would sit together and sing together, and there would be like musical puppetry and all kinds of crazy creative stuff, and it was everything you'd hope. There was a lot of sort of encouraging kids to developing the whole child. It was sort of this progressive theories on what education should be and all that stuff. So I didn't learn any math in school, but I got to mess around with music and sort of do more creative things,
Yes. Yeah. And so like on a hands-on type of way, that's you being able to go grab the record collection and put on the Harder They Come, or were you really listening to this with your folks?
No, we had a record collection, and we'd throw that music on, and the Beatles, and it just what else was big? I mean, I remember there was a favorite piece of music me and my sister had. It was William Tell Overture.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And you know how it starts slow and it gets fast?
Yeah.
It starts like that. That to me was like the most exciting thing, like the feeling, that kind of tension and the energy of that. And by the end, you're kind of sliding around, running around the house and all that kind of stuff. So, music, but no lessons. We had a busted up piano. My cousin Neil is the conductor of the Dayton Symphony. Other than that, though, there's not a lot of that thread of music running through our family.
When did music look like it was going to be something more serious than sitting around the school co-op carpet singing to one another? Like, when did it look like it was going to be something to you that you were going to pursue?
Wow. When I was in high school, I started roadieing for bands. That was sort of, when I was in high school, my sister and the guitar player for the BossTones, Nate Albert, his brother, saw the Clash in New York, and we were getting our tastes were being fed by our older siblings at that point,
Mm-hmm.
And one day up in the attic, there's a drum set there, and we started trying to figure out songs, and as you do, we needed a bass player, and that was me. I traded a skateboard for a bass guitar, and that's how it all kind of starts. But it was really that roadieing for bands, sort of just being in the room was sort of my initial goal. I loved that. So in high school, but I would tour though. We'd do weekend tours. Sometimes I'd get picked up from high school on a Friday and get dropped off there on a Monday, working for some really cool Boston bands with some great songwriters. A band called The Outlets was one of my favorites. This guy, Dave Barton, who was the songwriter for that band, was really, really incredible and certainly influential. So for me, there was this music, there was Jimmy Cliff, and we're listening to this music, but there's also a local scene that is, becoming more and more important to me and my friends. Being at the shows, being a roadie allowed me to be underage in bars and stuff like that. So it was just really like the excitement of being around people who could, just amazing live bands and great songwriters was inspiring. And I was fortunate to have some parents who were artists themselves, both photographers. My dad was a filmmaker as well. So there was some encouragement there, and going to that school, there was I think an understanding among my parents that there was not only one sort of prescribed path, that you could pursue things that feel right, and there's a way to make a living doing what you love, and my parents sort of demonstrated that to me, I think.
Well, and they must have just really trusted you too. It's like if you're going to go away on the weekends in high school to roadie gigs and clubs, like they must have trusted you to be a kid with his head on his shoulders.
I got a lot of encouragement. My mom was like, she saw that I had energy for this, and it's funny. The first place the BossTones ever practiced was this little garage. There was a row of garages in Central Square, Cambridge, where I grew up. And they were like rental garages, people. It was a residential neighborhood, but there was this little plot of land that had these busted up old garages. And my mom was able to get the guy to rent her one of these garages. There was no power though. And so she had to construct this 200-foot long extension cord that ran from our house out, sort of drooping across our yard over to the roof of the garage and then down. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think I could have had more supportive parents in that way,
What did it, you mentioned earlier that, so on the one hand you have, this kind of, this connection to the records of like, kind of like the formal music business, you hear that stuff, but then you're kind of entrenched in like this smaller, local, more parochial scene. You said it's like an actual scene. What did that look like on the ground? Like what type of clubs were you playing when you were roadieing? Was it all the same people? Was it 50 people at a show? Was it 350? Like what did that scene look like at the time?
Well, the all ages shows started to really be the thing that were of interest for us. Some of those were at the VFW halls. You could see I saw Minor Threat at the VFW hall, and West Cambridge. The Misfits played at the Unitarian Church. And then there were these ska bands, Bim Scala. Bim was an early ska band from Boston. I roadied for a band called Mission Impossible. My sister dated the drummer, and that was one of the first bands I worked with. But it was very kind of like, I saw that there were individuals that were kind of making things happen, like you start meeting people and, that's the promoter, and that's the that's the booking agent or whatever. Start to understand that there's a organization to this. And the day after I graduated high school, I got asked to go on tour, a national tour. And so I hopped in the van and I roadied for this band called Gangrene for a couple tours. I eventually ended up joining the band as a bass player. But on that tour, it was funny. I saw some gigs falling through. We had a binder of, some things that were kind of looked like contracts, a fax or a letter that was Xeroxed. And I noticed that the shows that fell through, they were the ones that really didn't have that contract or didn't have that deal memo or anything like that. I remember some gigs where literally we were waiting outside to get paid, and finally someone comes out and goes, "Oh no, Fred left, man. Fred's gone." Yeah. The guy you're supposed to pay. So I don't know. I loved it all. I loved being in the van. I love being away from home and seeing how big the world is. And that feeling of coming home, coming over the hill and seeing Boston after a month away as an 18-year-old kid was like, holy cow, man. There's a lot to experience. And so I think it was just a really eye-opening kind of thing for me. You know?
Yeah, you feel like you're returning on Ahab's ship back to Nantucket after after circumnavigating the globe.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say the BossTones did exist when we were in high school. We got together for a couple of years, played a handful of shows. Most notably opened up for Fishbone at the Sandwich Shop in Harvard Square.
Oh, wow.
John Fish, it was called. But then we disbanded for a few years. Our guitar player went to college, and we eventually got back together in '89 and recorded our first record.
So that's interesting then. So if the BossTones kind of existed for a bit and then there's this hiatus, you're going on these tours with other bands. Did you have a larger vision for what this was going to look like for you? Or were you just 18 and you were like, I want to freaking see San Francisco, man, for free. You know what I mean? Like
no vision
at
all, you know. It really wasn't until maybe the BossTones' second record, you know, and there started to be a little like local traction and things. A song started getting played on the radio, and I know that I loved writing songs by that point. You know, that the songs we were writing were starting to, you know, move the room, and that was really the thing. The BossTones really went from a no one cares, you know, first of three club band to you know, packing all ages shows, and it happened relatively quickly. And I think it took us a minute to really find our constituency. Getting signed to Tang Records was a big thing, because that was sort of at a time when it, you know, being on a label, what label you were on kind of mattered, and it sort of was the thing that said like, this, we're part of this scene, you know. And when we did that and started playing all ages shows, suddenly it was like, oh, we had been relying on Dickie, our singer's friends, to get us the gigs, and those were 21 plus, and that wasn't, we had more energy than those people really wanted. And when we started playing for kids, it was sort of like a flipping the light switch kind of moment, and things developed really quickly for us. And we went, you know, quickly from our first tour, opening up for Murphy's Law, playing the Midwest, to going back to those same places and like bring more people. You know, it was a pretty quick spread in those early days, and so there was a lot to be excited about. And certainly by that point we were planning for the next one and talking about, well, how can we get to Europe, you know. And at that point you got to Europe by coming home from a US tour and finding a voice message on your answering machine from somebody in Europe, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, guess what, someone from Europe called, you know. And the next thing you know, you're in Europe.
It's interesting there. It sounds like on one hand, you credit that sort of grassroots explosion of support from listeners to, you know, kind of becoming a part of a scene and finding the people who would be predisposed to listen to your music, which I'm sure played a role in part of it. But I'm very interested in, you kind of made a reference there to the fact, you said, okay, I'm getting interested in songwriting, and then I kind of learned how to write some songs that would move the room a little bit. And that to me always seems like, we all know people who have bands that got signed to labels, but they never attracted like listener support. I mean, listeners ultimately decide what is compelling to them. So what was that process like, learning how to write songs, and was it a conscious process that you were able to do that made people connect with these songs, or was it a little bit more intuitive?
Well, you know, let me go back to, you had asked an interesting question about that hybrid, you know, the ska and punk thing at that time, and how did that come to be? I think I missed that, but I will say, like, I remember in the early days when the first time people were in the room with us, like in the basement of our drummer's house, and, you know, some high school friends, and we're inviting people to listen to us practice. I remember there was a friend of our drummer. We played a song, and I remember she goes, "Oh my God, I love the way that you went from that like kind of like bouncy ska thing to that like, you know, revved up kind of punk part, and then back." And that transition, the stark transition, you know, we didn't want to really create or I don't know if at that point we wanted anything, but what we ultimately ended up doing was sort of scotch taping these parts together. This is the punk part, and it meets the ska part. You know, it wasn't so much sort of a cohesive, it was more sort of sectional. We loved the stark contrast between parts, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really informed by that, you know, people hearing our music and them just saying like, oh, it's cool that you do this, you know, just like what are people responding to, you know, what is it that we're doing that makes them interested, I guess.
So were you then writing in the room together as a band to be able to tape those things together, or were you writing separately and saying, hey guys, this is how it's going to go?
You know, some of both at that point, I'm sure. You know, many times I would drive to the South End and it would just be me and Dickie. He lived in a loft at the time, and I'd have an acoustic and we'd sort of wrestle our way through. But I mean, we didn't even have a way to record things, to remember what we were working on, you know. So, you know, the little handheld voice tape recorder, I have about 12 of these. I don't mean cassettes, I mean the whole units where I buy a new one on tour, and, you know, like these little things, dictaphone. So I started doing some of that. I remember sort of pre 4-track for me anyway. I had a little 2 cassette boombox where you could somehow, I don't know if it was because it had some kind of a karaoke function, but you could record something and then play it and then play on top of it. It would sound terrible, but you could start to stack ideas. And that was the way that I sort of started to think, okay, but how might I, as a self-taught bass player, guitar player, compose a horn melody? You know what I mean? And so I started laying out chord progressions, then trying to just sort of find melodies on top of it, that kind of thing. You know, Dickie had experience. He was a little older. He had been in a hardcore band called Impact Unit, and a band called the Cheapskates that was really sort of the precursor to the BossTones. It was sort of a fun ska thing that had a lot of the same bells and whistles, I think, as the BossTones. You know, he had experience, and he showed us stuff that you could write, and clearly he had a tendency to sort of study the world, and he was interested in human nature and being older and living on his own. We were high school kids, and it was very clear that, you know, he had the perspective that, you know, what would become the perspective of the band. And so his lyrics, it was amazing to me to even have lyrics in front of me, someone to give you like, oh, I've written these words, and how can you take this and turn it into a song? And so me as a non-lyricist, and Dickie as a he doesn't play an instrument, non-musician. It's sort of like we just got in the room together and just kind of, you know, with what equipment we had and what knowledge we had, and we just set about trying to, you know, move the room, you know.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because I love when songwriters are bassists, because the bass is this marriage of rhythm and melody. And so it sounds like, and you have to marry those two things, the rhythm and the melody. And what you're describing there in your writing process, it's like you're there with, you know, effectively the lyricist, and you are the melody and the rhythm there, trying to figure out the kernel of this thing, those three, that trinity, you know, coming together there.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be nice if we could just flip the switch and all of that kind of just comes together perfectly? But it's hard, you know. And I definitely recognized early on that not everything was going to move the room, you know. And you learn some of that from you know, trying stuff out in front of folks, but you start to get a feel for it, you know. And I was never really like, you know, like, well, I only write songs for me, kind of a thing. And that's certainly something I relate to at this point in my life. Like,
sure,
you know, sort of doing music for music's sake. The joy of writing the song is sort of like, for me, where the excitement exists at this point, you know. Mm-hmm. But at that point, I really wanted to write songs that would keep people coming back and getting them excited. And, you know, what are those moments in our set that can kick it from an 8 to a 10 and all that kind of stuff. It was fun, you know. And the energy, of course, is infectious. And the energy you get back makes you want to give more. And, you know, there's just sort of like a feedback loop that goes on there when people are coming to see you play. and they started to know the words, and they're starting to dress like you. That was
Right.
funny when we got signed to what was it called at the time? Mercury, our first major label deal. I remember clearly the guy who signed us, kind of like the head of A&R there. He said to us, he said like, you know, I don't really know what this is, you know, or what's going on with it. Like, musically, he had no real way to engage us on, but I don't really know what this is. But, you know, I went to your show in New Britain, Connecticut, and I saw, you know, kids were lined up around the block and they were all dressed like you. And to him, that was sort of like an indicator that there was something that was worth investing in.
He's a smart guy, though. I mean, that is a very clear signal, you know?
I guess so. You know?
So describe that to me, because what you're talking about there is this transition from you guys start as a regional band, then you're playing around the country, then you're playing in Europe via, you know, voicemail messages that you've gotten to invite you over. And that's a thing, and that's a real thing. That is still different from, you know, I am a kid in suburban Maryland and in the mid 90s listening to WHFS, and you know, when the impression that I get comes out, this juggernaut of a song for you guys, this is being played right alongside Nirvana and the Foo Fighters and Rage Against the Machine. I mean, this thing ends up going to a level that is the very heights of what the music business is. So how did that happen, number one? And then number two, what did that feel like on an artistic level, but also on a personal level? I mean, it had to be a bit of you had to be kind of thrown for a loop, it seems like to me.
Absolutely. It was incredible. Absolutely incredible. I remember coming back from a tour, you know, and listening to BCN, which was like the Boston sort of big modern rock radio station. They weren't the first station to play the BossTones, but, you know, they got on that Impression song for sure. And I remember coming back and they were going, it was basically, they go, do you know, like they're just talking to the people, do you guys know that the BossTones are selling more records than Metallica? Like they're trying to put it in context sort of for the fans. And the best thing about the whole thing was like the scene, you know, the fans, the other bands saw that we had been working hard, you know, sort of, you know, we didn't really change our formula, you know, we just kind of stuck with it. I remember the record before, there was a lot of pressure from the label to lose some of the horns, like, because it was that Nirvana kind of moment, you know, does every song have to have horns, kind of a conversation? And, you know, we were a gang, you know, and we're not gonna go on stage, you know, without our whole gang, and we're not gonna make a record that doesn't have our whole gang on it and that kind of thing. So the times changed, you know, to be honest, you know, No Doubt happened. Time Bomb from Rancid started getting played on the radio. There was that sort of shift. Kurt Cobain had died. You know, it was like there was just a changing of the mood, or something happened at that time. And it was just, we were kind of right place, right time. That song wasn't initially going to be on the record. It was we had written probably twice as many songs that ended up on there. It was one of the songs that was, it actually, we decided to put it on a different thing. We released this, it was a benefit compilation called Safe and Sound that was to raise awareness and some money over, there was a shooting at a women's healthcare facility in Brookline, Massachusetts. And we put out this Safe and Sound compilation, and the impression that I got was on that. And radio stations started playing it to the point that the label was trying to get them to cool their jets. Like, hey, can you hold off, and the full album's coming, that kind of thing. And so it was great. You know, it was, I felt the love of the city. I felt the love of our fans. I felt the love of our friends and other bands. And, you know, it was that time when people in your family started going like, wow, you know, like, hey, that music stuff Joe's onto, you know, is starting to work or something. You know, we did Sesame, the thing with Alamo Palooza, Sesame Street. That was sort of, I think, the thing that really kind of gave us some credibility with the family. Was like, oh, now he's collaborating with Elmo, you know, a whole new level.
It's there is. I've read a story before about Booker T and the MGs cutting green onions, and they just kind of cut it on a lark and sent it to a friend at a radio station. And as soon as they send it to the radio station and it's played, the switchboard lights up like a Christmas tree, basically, and people have to hear this song. And so that sounds like a very it sounds like a very similar situation with that song. I mean, it's almost like the Reddit thing of people like vote up the thread what is a compelling song, or in that case, a compelling piece of information. It's like the people have spoken in a way,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that right time, right place thing is a big piece of it, of success for anybody, just sort of having the right thing for the moment, I guess. There's a luck involved, but you really only have access to that luck if you're going to stay true to your thing, though. You know what I mean? Because you very easily can end up in a situation where you're moving towards something that by the time you finish the record, and at that stage with the major label involved and the release schedule and all this kind of stuff, things move on. And had we followed the label's advice and ditched the horns and tried to sound more like Nirvana, we wouldn't have had that moment,
Yes.
So I think there's a stick to your guns kind of element that can work to your favor if you're able to stick to your guns and just sort of hope for. Some of the most amazing things that happened to us were just dumb luck. I remember we were on tour one time in where was it? Colorado, and we had recorded a cover version of Enter Sandman, that Metallica song, and we were trying to get it out before their version. We had a cassette of like a pre-release of Enter Sandman, and that was our thought. Like, wouldn't it be funny if we could get it out before them? I don't think it would have been funny. It would have been rude, quite frankly. But what we released this fast version of Enter Sandman. We're in Colorado and messing around in the trailer, and all of a sudden James Hetfield is walking by with Brian Slagle from Metal Blade, and we gave him the CD and the shirt, and they were playing at 7:00 at the big arena there in Denver. We invited them to our show, and literally as our show ended and we're walking out the back door to go around to the dressing room, these limos pulled up, and Hetfield got out of the limo with a little crew of people, and the crowd was calling for an encore, and we're like, James, you got to do Enter Sandman with us, He's like, yeah, let's do it. And we went back into this room. There were like 100 people packed in a little room, and we did Enter Sandman with James Hetfield. And like those kinds of things, they only happen to you if you're out there in the mix,
right. Right. So. Well, and same for those audience members. I mean, those 100 audience members, had to be rubbing their eyes as he walked on stage for that. So
it's still one of my most fondly remembered moments of the whole thing. It's incredible.
Getting better at your instrument is an essential part of being a songwriter. When you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. How do you do that, though? Sure, you could get lessons from the neighbor who majored in the Mixolydian scale at Tulane, but that'll cost you an arm and a leg. Or else you could pull up YouTube and pay nothing at all, but that becomes the ultimate time suck. You'll just end up sifting through videos of nerds unironically weeping as they describe their first time seeing John Mayer's Blues Trio with Pino Palladino. So what's the sweet spot in between? Peghead Nation, the online home for American roots music. They feature curated video workshops with world-class instructors on guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, upright bass, dobro, and ukulele. They have levels of instruction that meet the needs of both scrappy upstarts and grizzled veterans. And most importantly, all of it comes in at a low monthly subscription that actual strapped-for-cash songwriters can easily afford. To start taking classes yourself, head on over to pegheadnation.com to check out their 50 available courses. Enter the promo code TWS to get your first month free. You can also send a gift subscription to the songwriter in your life or to the player in your band who needs a not-so-subtle hint about their playing prowess. Peghead Nation, when you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. The BossTones, to hear Joe tell it, were at heart friends. In childhood, friendship is a common thing, but once adulthood hits, I'll tell you, you're lucky to have 3 really good friends in your life. Friendship is a difficult thing once everyone's lives have taken their own courses and formed their own idiosyncrasies and developed their own responsibilities. That's what makes the time that he spent with the band, nearly 40 years, so special. Because friendships like that are hard to come by. And there's a wonderful poem by the poet Adam Zagajewski that explores why. It's entitled Impossible Friendships. For example, with someone who no longer is, who exists only in yellowed letters, or long walks beside a stream whose depths hold hidden porcelain cups, and the talks about philosophy with a timid student or the postman, a passerby with proud eyes whom you'll never know. Friendship with this world, ever more perfect, if not for the salty smell of blood. The old man sipping coffee in St. Lazare who reminds you of someone. Faces flashing by in local trains. The happy faces of travelers headed perhaps for a splendid ball or a beheading. And friendship with yourself, since after all, you don't know who you are. So how did the band begin to navigate that kind of success? Because if it's not navigated well, what is a blessing can quickly turn into a curse in some ways. But you guys would remain together for, another several decades after this. So clearly you were able to manage it to a very successful degree, I would say, outside looking in. How were you guys able to manage that kind of success?
Yeah. In some ways poorly. I think honestly, I see ways that we could have done things better probably. With that, the MTV success and the radio success, that's really that's like steroids, career steroids. You know what I mean? Like you're pumped up, and all of that is ephemeral, though, or for many people it's ephemeral. Yeah. And you run the risk, of course, of running up against expectations that are not in line with what's going to happen, and that hurt. I'll be honest. Like feeling some of those people going away. Not being able to deliver that same sort of result. Our next record didn't do what the one before had done. You feel that, the label feels that. You become less of a priority, and we ultimately got dropped after that next record from our major label thing. But we still had what we had before it. We were still able to go out and pack clubs, and we were lucky in that regard. I think probably because we had built it up the right way. It wasn't. There were a lot of BossTones fans who were fans before that success, and there were a lot that were. That are fans after that success. But, I'd be lying if I said to you that it didn't hurt me in some way, and I think that's where, your ego kind of gets in there, or like, you start to believe your own hype or something like that. You know what I mean? So I felt the loss of that and getting dropped by the label. I certainly felt the further loss of that. And, it kind of rocks you in a way, and where do I fit in now, and all those kinds of thoughts come into play. But that record, that follow-up record that got us dropped, is a great record. It's an incredible record. I'm so proud of all the BossTones records. I think, just the body of work, and the songs that I've written together with Dickie and all of that stuff. I love it. I just love it. And I certainly see it differently now. I don't feel the pain of getting dropped from that label now.
Right. Well, especially because it seems like for you personally, that would put you into a new, like around, early 2000s, seems like to me, you kind of entered into a new and pretty fruitful creative period where you're writing songs for other bands, or at least other bands are picking up your songs and recording them, where you're producing for other bands. Can you kind of talk about that next chapter that you would step into at that point, and how your creative process changed?
Yeah, the first few records I produced were just kind of like friends we'd toured with. What was it from the first one? There's a band called The Smooths, I think might have been the first record I did. My friends at Side One Dummy offered me that. The Amazing Royal Crowns. It was just because people I knew, from people who had opened up for the BossTones, and they thought, oh man, it would be cool to work with the guy from the BossTones, kind of a thing, And I had always sort of produced or co-produced the BossTones records. Well, me and Dickie had always produced or co-produced the BossTones record, even if our name wasn't on it. We played a big role. We were the guys who were there from the time you started getting kick drum sounds until the mix was done.
Yeah.
We just couldn't not be there.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, remind me of the question.
Well, the question is so you kind of head into this new creative period where,
Gotcha. So I started, I had never really written lyrics in the BossTones. That was always Dickie's thing. And I had the pleasure of working collaboratively with someone who's an incredible lyricist. I was always in awe of his work, but I wanted to try it. And more of the songs I was writing for the BossTones had words when I would present them. They would be recorded demos by this point. And they'd have words, but really just by way of demonstrating the melody. You know what I mean? Like just placeholder words or those types of things. And I enjoyed writing those lyrics, but I also recognized that like Dickie, the BossTones, the perspective of the BossTones, that belongs to Dick, really. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like he's always been the voice and the driver of all that. So I wanted to experiment with it. So I started a little side project called Avoid One Thing. It's sort of like kind of a little, I don't know, pop punk band, I guess you'd call it, rock band, and made a record just to experiment with what it's like to write the words and see what that feels like. But really just for fun. And the home run of that first record was the band The Bouncing Souls covered the song Lean on Sheena. I had written a song called Lean on Sheena that was on that first Avoid One Thing record. And weirdly enough, the drummer for the Souls reviewed it at one point. He was doing some writing or something when he reviewed the song. Some friends, producer Ted Hutt, pitched it to the Bouncing Souls as, hey, they're working on a record. Hey, but what about this kind of a thing? And I was just sort of lucky enough that they were open to the idea, that they worked on it, and it sort of, it worked for them. It got run through their machinery. It's the song Lean on Sheena really belongs to the Bouncing Souls. I wrote that song, but that's their song, in truth. When I play that song, people sing their version. Right. So, it's like, that's not a battle I want to fight. I more and more I'm just trying to learn their version better.
Well, and I think it's a true testament to the song. Like if sometimes songs can be great because maybe it's not the song that's so great, it's just that someone has a sheer force of personality that people identify with. But when someone else can do the definitive version of your song, that by definition means that it's the song itself doing all the heavy lifting.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting thought for sure, and I'll tell you, people send me clips all the time, text me videos of the Bouncing Souls playing Lean on Sheena. Like I get these all the time, like from a random friend in this country or this place who know I wrote the song will send me like a clip of this crowd singing Lean on Sheena. And I've stood on the side of the stage and watched the Bouncing Souls play it. And they've I've done it with them 2 times to limited success. But it's great. It's so great to see that. I love those guys so much. They're just, in terms of songwriters, I will say too, I think that they are really, really just top shelf.
You mentioned that in many ways, because he was responsible for the lyrics for the BossTones, that like kind of the perspective of the BossTones was Dickie's. Where did your perspective, like when you start this project of your own, start writing your own lyrics, how did that perspective shift? How was it different from what the BossTones were putting out?
Um, I don't, my lyrics tend to be just more personal and sort of reflective on experiences I've had, or sort of a collage of memories. You know, I'm trying to get at some sort of sentimentality or a feeling that I'm hearkening back. You know, yes. I quit drinking in oh God, I quit drinking in 1995, I guess, and I think that those records, Avoid One Thing records, is in a lot of ways is reflecting back and dealing with some of that in some ways, or sort of working through some of that. Dickie writes big songs, and he writes songs about from a historical perspective and about people and about society and politics and that kind of stuff. You know, he's got a lot of interests, and his lyrics are really like you can put a real sharp point on it. You know what I mean? So I'll mention too, when I started to start writing more melodies and giving him demos that had some lyrics in it and stuff like that, he got really good at, like, if he saw something in there, a chorus maybe, or a few lines in a chorus that I'd give him. On the last record, there were a couple of choruses that were kind of, majority of it were my words, and then he kind of finished it, but he wrote a whole thing around it and put like a sharp point on it. Like, that's something he can do that I'm still trying to figure it out. You know, like having it be sort of concise, you know, and what words are, what lines are carrying weight and what lines are really not, you know, mm-hmm. and what's advancing the story and what's clogging the way, or something like that, you know.
That's really interesting, because most collaborations between artists can't last for a long time, and they just don't. And not only that, they certainly can't usually change over time. So what you're talking about is working with a creative partner for many years, and then, you know, in the late 90s, a dynamic starting to change because you're bringing more to the table as to what, you know, you have these lyrics or sometimes dummy lyrics, and then your creative partner, instead of like kind of seizing up there and saying, well, that's not how we work here, man, he kind of takes it and runs with it. What do you think it was about your character or his character, or the interplay between the two of those, that allowed you guys to not only collaborate for so long, but also like change with one another?
Because we're friends, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good, man. Yeah. I guess what you're talking about is love there. Love for one another.
Yeah.
You know?
We have a lot of love for each other.
Yeah. Because, yeah, in some ways it does remind me of a marriage, because, you know, my wife and I are always talking about, like, you know, we've been together since high school, man. And there's been a lot of different versions of us over the years, you know what I mean? And there's got to be. Things just don't remain static, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And there's been a lot of change, you know. I mean, we both were big drinkers, and we both got sober, and we rode that, you know, that sort of we withstood a lot, you know. There were a lot of times in there that, you know, lesser bands would have, you know, not gone on, but we love doing it, and there's some responsibility for the fans that comes into play too, or feeling that, you know, wanting to make them happy. And of course there's the joy to doing the music together and all of that. I mean, there's always been a lot propelling it, a lot.
It's really interesting to me and edifying to think that you consider, obviously you guys have contributed your lives to this music and this band, but it's really edifying to think that you realize that fans have done the same thing. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, I've been coming to see your damn band for 25 years, man, and that's something,
Totally. A lot of people have committed a lot of time to it, and that's, and therein lies the beauty of a long-lasting band,
Yes.
The history of it and all of that. You can't take it away, It's always there.
Yes, and because life is limited to some degree, it is a zero-sum game, and because you choose to do this, you don't do other things. So your options become limited over time, but that is what makes what you did have deep meaning to it,
Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very proud of that.
Yes, as you well should be. Well, now you actually teach songwriting now. I'm interested. What are you trying to get across to your students when you teach? Are you like a technical teacher?
No,
are you? Okay.
No. I mean, anything that I understand about music theory is just sort of understood on the neck of a guitar.
Sure.
I'm not a sight reader, but I try and find a way to help students sort of develop a bit of a practice. I think in that, giving them some structure or foundation, limitations oftentimes. Limitations in terms of chords or structure, assignments that kind of box them in, I think is good. Part of the challenge with songwriting is just the endless choices that exist, like there's too much to choose from. And as a result, you end up kind of pulling in too much, I think sometimes. It's funny, but that question, I can, as somebody who is very much a do-it-yourself, self-taught kind of person, I can very easily kind of relate with the idea like, well, but how do you really teach songwriting? You know what I mean? Like that. I remember the first year I started teaching, this is Northern Vermont University, probably 12 years ago I started teaching. I teach in a music business program. For the most part, I teach like publishing and copyright course or artist management, but I do teach this basic songwriting class. I remember I met Nico Case played up at our college the first year I taught there, and met after the show or something and having a similar chat. And she asked me that same question about, well, how do you teach songwriting? Kind of like, no, she said, it was something really funny. She goes, when you teach, she's like, now when you're teaching songwriting, do you tell them to get divorced first or start drinking? Like just some kind of funny comment that spoke to the fact that so much of it is about trying to just connect with life and bring that in kind of.
Right. Right.
I think that, there is, there is a little bit of, for me personally, like the technical instruction can only get you so far really. And then it can also, I think, can sometimes keep you from progressing maybe in some ways, feeling too tied to something that, is a rule,
Yes. Yeah. Do you find that a lot of your students are rule followers in that way? And if they are, how do you disabuse them of that?
Well, I think that those assignments sometimes when you make them do something that's totally uncomfortable, like I'll say, all right, listen, I want to write a little song scrap is going to be due Wednesday, and I want the lyrics to be made up entirely of things you've overheard in public, or like getting them to write from different perspective. Like students have a tendency, I think, sometimes for it to be very personal and emotional and relationship-y and sometimes it can be reflective of popular music at that moment. And, but I don't know. I kind of feel like through limiting their choices and getting them to work in ways that are uncomfortable, they discover ways in which they work. And there's some ideas that they really connect with and they want to continue kind of keeping the same process. object writing or different kind of journaling exercises, kind of as a way to just build up some ammunition, try and find, those diamond in a rough lines, just one little line or word that might exist within this larger kind of writing assignment or something, and helping them recognize that there's so much value in these kind of the moments of inspiration that you're not laboring over. I don't know who said that line about there's some about writer's block is a failure of the ego to, it's sort of like it's a failure of your ego to recognize the value in your own work, or something along those lines. There's something there. And I do think that students are so quick to talk about writer's block. I have writer's block. So when you give them an assignment that has a due date and a very sort of prescribed set of instructions, it sort of like eliminates that sort of like that writer's block stress,
Yes. No, 100%.
To understand that there's nothing at stake. You know what I mean? That you got to relax and try and create the conditions. This goes back to my sitting on the floor, hippy dippy, open classroom, puppet days. But, trying to create the right conditions where people just feel comfortable putting their ideas out there and talking to each other and giving feedback in productive ways, and what it's like to collaborate, and how you can keep your ego from getting in the way of collaborating with people, and trying to understand the benefit of ideas that come from unexpected corners of the room, or whatever it is, just trying to have people feel open, have an openness there that allows for these ideas to be explored, I guess, create the right conditions, I guess. I don't know what else I can do beyond that, to be honest with you. I will say this, my students write great songs, and a lot of these songs have been recorded and have been released, and have done well for them in bands that they've toured with, or those kinds of things. The first songwriting class I taught, there's a student of mine I'm working with now. So I'm releasing solo stuff now. I'm calling it. The first one was an EP called The Grand Collection Volume 1, which is pretty ridiculous. But I'm working on Volume 2 now, and I'm co-writing with one of my students from the very first songwriting class I taught. This kid, Rye McDonald, is a really fantastic songwriter. It's been fun working with some younger people. It's been fun working with students on this first EP I released. A few of my students played on it. This next one, I might have one of my students produce it, actually. I'm talking to him about that. And so that bringing old friends into it, bringing students into it, I don't know. Just trying to get more people involved with songwriting and offering different perspectives and that kind of stuff. I really love that.
Well, this show, The Working Songwriter, is about people who have contributed mightily to American music. Not only, and I think that you've just been such a fantastic guest here, not only because of what you've contributed with the BossTones and then what you did producing for other people, but now also doing what you're talking about right now, like helping other younger generations become another link in the chain. And all this is to say, it's been phenomenal talking to you, and thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Hey, thank you very much. I love the show, and I really appreciate you spending the time with me.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. The Mighty Mighty BossTones' final album is entitled When God Was Great, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.